Welcome to Ever Weird World. Let's talk about Cairn, and specifically the second edition box set, which was recently fulfilled from its Kickstarter. So briefly, let me give you my overview of how I came into Cairn. The creator of Cairn, Yochai Gao, has a podcast called Between Two Cairns with Brad Kerr, another OSR designer. And I don't know how I found this podcast. I think I was looking for a specific old school adventure review, like a specific module to be reviewed, and I came across their podcast and I was hooked. Just loved this. Shortly thereafter, the second edition of Cairn Kickstarter came along, and I thought, well, I'm not a patron. I'm not supporting the show financially in another way. Let me become a Kickstarter backer of this. But in the meantime, I bought the first edition, which was really like a print on demand. All the rules were available free at cairnrpg.com, but you could get these print on demand copies from Amazon or Lulu or whatever. I bought one and then immediately bought like 3 more, as well as the bestiary, because I thought at first this is the perfect portable game for me. And I play a lot of games with kids. I'm always looking for like a simpler rule set to play with kids. And I thought this might do it. It's got this old school exploration, adventuring sort of bias to it, like where that's what you're doing rather than combat. And Yochai comes from the story game background. I have played a lot of those story games as well and thought, well, this is going to be great. I'm going to be familiar with this. I'm going to be able to tell those stories or participate in those stories, participate in creating those stories and helping them emerge from play, which is what I longed for in 5th edition. So Cairn was in the mix as I was figuring out where to go with what games to play. But I think I had some misunderstood expectations about this first edition of Cairn. What I thought was that Cairn was going to be sort of like a complete rule set, and I could just drop it in and go, or just bring it to new players and say, hey, here's a copy of this. Let's all quickly make characters and go on an adventure. And what I found was there were a couple of things that would require me to explain too much in the way of this is now going to become a system, and it's not simply a pick up and play kind of thing. Let me try to justify that. For starters, though, I want to highlight the principles for Wardens, which is what Cairn calls your GM, and the principles for players. This is so good, so succinct, so perfectly stated that I immediately began sharing this with 5th edition players. I was just like, hey, this works for any game. Read this stuff. Cairn itself is a hack of Into the Odd. And Into the Odd, I didn't have any experience with before coming into Cairn, but this was just sort of all emerging at the same time as I got interested in the OSR or the old school revival scene. Into the Odd, in fact, as the Vintage RPG podcast pointed out, may actually kind of be a little nudge to say that they're going into the OD&D or into the original D&D. It was a real stripped down way of playing an adventure game with only 3 stats, strength, dexterity, and will, which I think it's around 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons, which is to say Advanced Dungeons & Dragons AD&D 3rd edition, where they simplified the saves down to, what are the 3? They're in Pathfinder still. It's fortitude, reflex, and will. So Into the Odd, you've basically got the same thing. Strength, dexterity, and will. Those are saves. So the idea is that you're narrating along, and when something happens that you need to do a save, the warden calls for that. You roll a d20 and hope to roll under your stat. Your stats are determined with a 3d6 roll, which is exactly like the original D&D and many other games in that genre. The roll under was a check in those early editions of D&D. You've probably seen me do that in my Beck Me play. It's just a thing that didn't really come up a lot. Into the Odd puts it front and center because it stripped out all the skills and all the other saves that you might level up with and says, no, you only have these 3 saves, strength, dexterity, and will. So you're telling the story is emerging from your exploration, and you might need to save from, a falling boulder, do a dex save, or from a magical effect, do a will save. That's as far as you use it. When you get into combat, all strikes hit. And then they do, in both of these games, you have an armor, and then you have hit points, or hit protection is what your HP stands for. So when you come into combat, here's a quick character that I've yet to name, but I made it up. Hopefully I've got that in the preview to this video that you see me, how quickly it is to roll up a character. I don't need to roll my dexterity to hit with my sling. I simply roll my d6. The game manager then takes that damage, subtracts the creature's armor from it. So let's say the creature has 1 armor, so I've got a 4. Actually, a 4 damage is going through, but then removes that from the hit protection of what I have hit. So there is kind of an abstraction here, as in all combat. This abstraction is there's no 2-hit roll, but there really kind of is. Your damage roll is your 2-hit. You're seeing how much damage gets past the armor and hit protection, which is sort of how well a creature or your PC maneuvers around the strike. You know, that's what that hit protection is. The difference here is that your hit protection comes right back after combat. If you can take a short break, have some water, food to refresh yourself, your hit protection comes right back. And as you can see, you only start with 1d6 hit protection. This character I rolled up only has 3 HP. So in a combat, say a goblin strikes me doing 4 points of damage. I subtract my 1 armor, so it does 3 points of damage. I have 3 hit protection. I have 0 hit protection. I'll get into what that means because that causes an interesting thing when you hit 0 HP exactly, but I don't drop down and unconscious. What happens after that is that damage is done to my strength score. That's why there's sort of a strength score and then a current strength score here. So if I take another 2 points of damage, I now have no hit protection to absorb that. I would subtract the armor. I take 1 point of damage. I'm left with 6 strength. Then I immediately have to do a strength save to avoid taking critical damage. So that save means getting under the 6. With that terrible roll, I get a 3, so I actually do save. I don't take critical damage. This, in a nutshell, this explanation of combat, while it makes sense to us as adults, this is a little too fidgety for me to present to kids. I know there's tons of kids out there that are playing this. I see these videos of other GMs running this game for kids and having a lot of fun. I have no doubt that I could teach it to a group of kids, but it was quickly apparent as I read through Cairn, I can't quickly just sort of hand out this book and have people who have played a role-playing game instantly understand it, especially kids. I'm going to have to have some sort of explainer to go through that. Because here's the big thing is that in my experience with kids, they understand HP right away. They understand having like a health score that's going to go down if they get hit. But they're not really going to understand, okay, but first I remove armor, then I remove protection, then I remove strength, but I have to save with my strength to avoid taking critical damage. It's just too fiddly for me to bring to a group with kids. I kind of got disillusioned with playing Cairn. I thought, oh, it's not going to serve the purpose I want. Additionally, I thought this was sort of an overlay where I could pick up any old school adventure and just run it with Cairn and like the stats would kind of translate over. And it turns out that while there is great instruction given on creating monsters as well as converting from OSR games, there is conversion that has to happen. And as I was coming into it unfamiliar with both OSR in general as well as the Cairn rules, I thought, oh no, I can't just bring an adventure to the table and run it as is. I'm going to have to do some conversion probably beforehand because I'm unfamiliar. So it quickly became something of like, there's too many steps here for me to get this to the table. And despite this package, how great I thought it was, I was kind of disillusioned with it. Nonetheless, like I said, because I wanted to support Yochai and Brad, I buy Brad's adventures as well. So I became a Kickstarter backer of Cairn, the second edition, and received it probably in the last month or so. So let's go through this box because this box is awesome. First of all, design, unbelievable. This portability of this box, I just love the idea that I'm going to bring this to a game night and we're all going to run it right out of the box. The whole Kickstarter was focused on the user experience, I think, here. And the first place this is evident is that there's a pile of stuff in here. And the first place this user experience is evident is that there are 3 copies of the player's guide. So rather than the case like I did with 1E, where I bought it, thought it looked great, and went and bought 3 more copies, this just came with 3 copies. So I can just hand these out at the table and my players have a reference. Then, as you saw me rolling up in the intro, character creation is super quick. Where first edition gave you sort of names and backgrounds. I'll just name my character real quick right here. Beatrice. So the first edition gave you these names and backgrounds, starting gear, some traits to roll on, like randomizing your starting gear, and then being able to pick up some. It was quick to play. One of the things I really appreciated was the optional gear packages where you could kind of come up with, hey, I want to play like an old school D&D class. Here's what it looks like to be an elf in here, or a magic user. You were kind of determined by the equipment you carried. You rolled the stats the same way. There were no benefits to your saves or anything. I liked that bit. But what Cairn 2e did is added these backgrounds that were just so flavorful and so full of this personality that you get of Yochai's as you listen to his podcast. For example, this one that I rolled up on that sample character, I don't even know how to pronounce this, the jongleur or something like that. I feel like Yochai did such a deep dive into historical professions or what they were called in myth and other stories, and then came up with like that. I'm going to name those backgrounds that way. So my jongleur looks to be sort of a performing kind of bard or something. What inspires the soul more than song, words, and spectacle? Why practice for years to master the arcane when you've already got real magic inside? That background really gives me a starting gear package, as well as 2 tables to roll on. They're D6s, what happened at your final performance, and what trinket are you unable to leave behind. What I rolled were, I mocked a forgotten trickster god and were cursed for it. I speak only in perfect rhyme. So I bring a thesaurus along with me, but without it I am deprived. And then I rolled the ghost violin, a dark gray violin that plays a haunting tune, mirrored by an invisible distant twin. So that is my background. That is my class sort of in these terms. Into the Odd does something very similar where you roll a background or a failed profession, I believe, and that's what gives you your starting package of gear. What I find in Cairn 2e, what became apparent to me as I got more into this, and certainly as I received the package, was I saw a use for it. This was no longer like an overlay that I could use to play D&D type games in Old Adventures. This was its own thing. This was its own personality, just like bursting out of these pages. Definitely seen in this art. I believe it's all by Bruno Prosecco, the cover art, and all of the interior art is Amanda Lee Frank. Bruno, I was not familiar with. Amanda Lee Frank's work, I really like. The flavor and the personality. Like, personality is the word that just keeps jumping out at me. Especially having listened to so many episodes of this podcast and sort of getting what Yochai is into. This feels like Yochai's game. It's got the same sort of character trait tables that you roll on, as well as bonds and omens. It gives you flavor right away, a starting gear package right away. You can take or leave that however you want or however you want to work it into your game. But you're getting something that, like, I now see how to play it with old school games because I'm bringing a Cairn flavor into an old adventure. So I didn't really mean to do a full review of the box set, but I do want to go through it and just point some things out. Everything is beautiful. The player's guide, like I said, it kind of opened up my mind. And I'll tell you, my big idea that came out of this is that I've had this long-running, 7 years at this point, 5e campaign where we are sort of at the end, like in that finale motion, ending the Act 3 kind of thing. And I haven't really known what to do with that group. They've always been open to playing other games. We've tried out a lot. When I started getting into this feel of Cairn, all of a sudden it hit me like, what if we just take their characters, those that survive this epic adventure, and we maybe choose a background for them that comes up naturally from Cairn, choose some of those traits so it won't be as random, but they are now those kind of old adventurers that we go through the Cairn rules and we go through old school adventures, and it's much more about exploration and not these epic feats and these heroic battles of, world-ending importance. Cairn presented to me like a great way to play with my friends that I think could keep us going in this like flavor of that original campaign that got us all playing role-playing games. Anyway, here's the Warden's Guide, which is similarly beautiful and guides a lot and gives you a lot of Yochai's thinking on building worlds, building dungeons, things like that. I always appreciate a workbook like this that's going to take me through those things. I, to be honest, have not dug into this as much as the player's guide. But I have seen a lot of it and just thought like, cool, I know how to use this and I know that I will use it from time to time to dip into and get inspiration. It has a section on Warden tools. Unlike the first short Cairn zine, this has a complete bestiary in it. So it has pretty much every classic monster with Cairn stats. So no longer am I presented with that difficulty of how do I convert on the fly a monster that I see in Keep on the Borderlands into Cairn. I don't have to do that. They're either in here or I can grab something equivalent and use their stats as a stand-in. This just gave me everything I want in terms of a bestiary. And of course, the illustrations are just like amazing in it. One thing that's very important in Cairn is that it is classless and levelless. So in Cairn 2e, there are specific instructions, and I wouldn't say instructions, advice or principles on how to grow those characters. And this takes a lot from those story game kind of games that Yochai talks about playing. And I just appreciate this so much coming from that same background, wanting a levelless game, wanting a classless game. This gives me great ideas for how to do it and how it can be done within Cairn. So I really like that. It's not dismissed as much as it isn't. There's some other games where we talk about leveling up comes as like the equipment you carry. In other words, you start getting magic armor and magic swords and things like this. But this gives us like a real way to grow and develop as characters. And so back to something I said when I gave that quick combat example. When you are reduced exactly to 0 HP on a hit, you take on a scar. So that's one way that your character grows and develops, is that you then roll on a scars table. So you roll on the scars table. Oh, sorry, you don't roll on it. It's how much HP did you lose? I lost 3 HP. I was walloped. I was sent flying and I landed on my face winded. Although I'm deprived for the next few hours, I roll a 1d6 and I add that amount to my max HP. So in effect, that scar is helping me level up a little bit. That's one of the ways that growth happens in Cairn. That whole section on growth, not only does it give you principles for it, but it gives you a lot of growth examples. And I think if you're unfamiliar with that kind of game, if you're not coming from story games, if you're coming from a more level up kind of game where there are hard and fast rules about what you gain at a level up, this growth section gives you plenty of examples. It kind of draws you into it without making it seem so rule heavy. I didn't play Powered by the Apocalypse games like Yochai did, but I came to it through Forged in the Dark games or through Fate. Some of that I took from Forged in the Dark, which was itself sort of a hack of Powered by the Apocalypse, is that some of those level ups are just in the character playbook. You just sort of select your next level up like you would in D&D. This gives you a little bit of like more squishy way to do it, as well as things that draw you into an adventure, like you need to complete this mission or train with someone for this. That gives you kind of hooks to further and deeper adventure. The Warden's Guide also has spell books in it. Spells work differently in Cairn than they do in other D&D type games. Anyone can cast a spell, but you do it by not moving, holding the spell book in both hands. That spell book could be like, you can imagine it as a rune or a scroll or a literal book, but each spell book is a separate piece of inventory that you have to carry. So the spells can be really quick, flavorful, again, full of like personality to the game, where they're not focused on hard and fast rules about it. Something I also like from Merkborg. There's also a reliquary in here. One of the main features of Cairn, the way it became a hack of Into the Odd, is that Into the Odd didn't really have a magic system. It just had arcana. It had magic items that you find. In fact, that's sort of your driving quest, is to find arcana. But Cairn changed that by introducing spellbooks, which I believe came from Knave or Maze Rats, one of those other OSR type games. But in addition to that, Cairn does have its own reliquary of magic items. Then there's a whole section of advice and examples. Just like everything else in here, it's really thoughtful. It's full of the personality of the creator, and I just appreciate it. I find these things as like things that I will flip to in a GM guide, but not dwell on. Cairn also presents you with a default setting, the setting of Vald, or a sort of scary forest, the wood. And I think this is like just enough to go on. I don't need full examples of like, here's what every city's character is like, and here's all the factions that play in that. I can create all that, or it's going to be in the adventure. Giving me sort of a generic setting like this lets me put adventures in it without having to worry too much about like the canon of that setting. So the box set also came with the adventure Trouble in Twin Lakes, which was written by Yochai, and then the adventure Anthology, which has contributions from Amanda P., Brad Kerr, and Zedek Shu. I know I've heard them say that name. I'm sorry, Zedek. I don't remember how to pronounce your last name. I think these are great examples of like old school kind of adventuring, giving you a scenario that you then get to kind of explore and discover the story around it. Because there are 4 adventures here between these 2 books, they all kind of represent different things. I believe there's like a hex crawl, a mansion adventure, a wilderness adventure, basically. And then Twin Lakes is what Brad would call a town with a problem adventure. It's hard for me to say whether I would run any of the adventures out of these. Nothing has hooked me so far, but what's more important is that they've given me ideas on how to run games with Cairn. The box set comes with a pad full of character sheets, so it's just really easy to tear those off and give them to players to make new characters, and comes with this beautiful Wardens screen, more art by Bruno Prosecco. It's just awesome. And inside, I think it has like everything I need to run a game. Of course, that's, what you say about every GM screen, but I just really like having an almost complete marketplace, if not complete from the book, as well as the procedures, the rules summary, and NPC tables. Like this gives me just enough to get going. That is the box. And that is hopefully like this great overview of how useful it is. If you're at all interested in a game like Cairn, that sort of narrative heavy, but old school feeling game, I think you should get the box. I guess I should say, especially if you see yourself doing what I intend on doing, which is like just using this as a portable companion to bring to any group that's familiar with adventuring games and saying, here it all is. Let's play. Just like the first edition, all of this has been open sourced as much as possible and is freely available online at cairnrpg.com. Yochai is a big believer in community and open sourcing as much as possible. That website is just an unbelievable asset for other adventures, links to conversions of adventures, more examples on how to convert things into Cairn. It has truly become like a really useful system with its own personality, and I look forward to taking players through some adventures using this system. That's all.